Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the ICG's Digital Academy webinar series. I'm Sally Alsop, member of the ICG committee and responsible for running our webinar programme. Having problems moving my slide on now. Oh, here we go. Right. There we go. Right. So in today's webinar, you'll be hearing from Curtis Arthur, who is the founder of Knowledge Activate and a member of the ICG. We're frequently asked to do more with less. This is especially true in the insights world, where our jobs include not only turning information into knowledge, but then communicating knowledge to others. One obvious but sometimes overlooked money-saving tactic is sweating your assets, i.e., getting as much use as possible out of what you already possess. During this webinar, Curtis will be sharing some practical tips with us for sweating insight assets by using simple, low-cost templates and tools. Curtis will be taking questions after his presentation, so as usual, please type them into the question box as we go through, and I'll read them out during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So the ICG can benefit so many. If you're an independent consultant or micro business, join us and benefit from networking, work opportunities, training, and so much more. If you're a client, find your perfect consultant through us. And if you've got a product or service that you want to get in front of our 400 members, advertise with us at very little cost. We're really grateful to AccuScribe for sponsoring this webinar. AccuScribe have 20 years of transcribing experience. They have vast experience in working in the market research sector, financial services, academic research and medical pharmaceutical. Whether it's focus groups, interviews or board or conference calls, online video meetings and groups, they can provide quality transcripts that meet your needs. Before I hand over to Curtis, here are the next webinars to note in your diaries. All are now open for registration. And don't forget that we're able to offer great value sponsorship opportunities with each of our webinars. Sponsorship costs £100 for a great deal of exposure on our website, mailers and social media, and of course on the day. Please contact Lucy if you'd like to know more. So our speaker today is Curtis Arthur, who's joining us from Canada, where I understand it's only 6 AM. So a special thanks to you, Curtis, for getting up so early to run this webinar for us. So welcome, Curtis, and I will now hand the reins over to you. Okay, have you got the?
I do.
That's great.
Great.
So we can see your slides if you put them into full slide mode. Fantastic. Okay, I'll mute myself and then join you again at the end.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sally, and thank you to the ICG. As we mentioned before, I'm located in Toronto, Canada. It's 6 AM, so if it's a little bit dark behind me, please forgive that. The sun's not going to come up for another hour. So the topic today is how to sweat your insight assets. So how can you get smart without spending a whole lot of money? And as Sally mentioned before, I'm the founder of Knowledge Activate, which is a small group that can help people sweat their insight assets. So the main takeaway from this session, first, you should be able to recognize the benefits of getting the most of what you have. And that is really important, especially today where people are being asked to do a lot more with a lot less. My personal philosophy is you know more than you think that you know, or you know more than you know that you know. And that's a great thing. The big question though is, what do you know? How do you remind yourself of what you know? How can you find what you know? And then how can you share that and communicate that to others? The second thing you'll be able to take away from this session is you'll have access to simple, low-cost templates and tools. At the end of the session, I'll share with you our website, and if you go to the website, you can download these templates directly from the website. Not asking for any money or anything like that. You can do it all for free. And also by the end of the session, hopefully you'll be energized to be able to start sweating your own assets. You'll recognize what you have, and you'll be excited to go out and start the process yourself. So the big question is, sweating your what? When I first saw this and sent this out to some of my friends, I got a couple of very smart alecky responses back. They did not quite read it correctly. So sweating your assets is a term that's been in the IT environment for over a decade right now. And it is described as visualizing, cutting costs, or getting the most out of what you already have and what you already possess. From a knowledge activate perspective, that means taking your insights beyond assimilation and then transferring that into action. And from my personal experience, it actually works. So here are 4 examples from my own personal career. The first is I was working with a retailer insight team that was planning their annual budget for the next year. And just by sweating their assets, understanding what they have, prioritizing what they're looking for, and removing duplication of effort, they were able to save 18% on their annual budget for the next year. With another group, we were able to save a lot of time and resources by creating baseline knowledge. So essentially making sure that everybody in the group and everybody in that part of the organization all had the same understanding of what they knew and what the implications were, and provided a way for people to access the insights and the processes themselves instead of asking their insights team to do it for them. A third group was an insight group that sort of, it's not that they'd lost credibility, but they'd sort of become part of the furniture. When you talk to the marketing and the category management team, they all recognized that the insights team was there, but really couldn't say much about it. So we went through almost an internal marketing campaign, and through workshops, webinars, attention gathering, communications and all that, we're able to reestablish that group, bring them more top of mind, and reestablish them as thought leaders within the organization. And then a fourth incident was one of the directors that came in, a new insight director came in, and we were able to help her better understand, ramp her up really quickly, better understand what they were doing, what they needed, and help her create a vision, a future vision for the insights group. So as I mentioned, it's from personal experience. So for people who know me, I've been in the insights world for over 25 years in the US and in Canada as well, mostly with IRI, with Nestle USA, and with AMIA. So if people who've heard of AMIA started off with Sainsbury's in the Nectar program and then spread internationally. So you can see here, I've worked with retailers pretty much all over the world, including in Saudi Arabia and in the UK as well. And what I've noticed in my time over the years is there's been a lot of great people doing a lot of great things. However, there's been a huge amount of frustration as well. And the frustration comes in where really smart people were making decisions based off of incomplete information. And as you can imagine, that is extremely frustrating. So a lot of the things that I heard as people were starting projects and going through processes were, that doesn't sound right. One thing that we don't talk about very often is, and I don't want to say misinformation, but essentially people that make statements sometimes in groups that aren't necessarily true, let's say. So somebody hears something that gets repeated, that gets repeated, that gets repeated. It tends to fall on the insights team and the insights professionals to go back and try and correct them. And it's very, very difficult because once a piece of misinformation gets out into the world, it's difficult to kind of squash that and bring that back. So the ability to then create that baseline knowledge and get everybody on the same page. Another thing is, do we have something that will help me with just the amount of time that's spent looking for things and to help people with annual plans or some kind of presentations? That tends to take up a lot of time and effort. And also, how am I supposed to make this decision when they don't have pieces of information that would help them with their decision making? So as far as the knowledge activation, there are 5 elements what we're talking about. The first is identifying and accessing the information. The second is creating one-page abstracts. The third is summarizing what we know. The fourth is identifying what we don't know. And the fifth is communicating and activating that knowledge. Now, I wrote this down as 5 elements. It's not a process necessarily because it's not something that's sequential. And you can choose to do all of these elements. You can do them in any particular order. There is a suggested order though, or even skip things if you don't have the time or the resources. So the first is identifying and accessing. So in other words, it used to be way back when that people would just do projects and keep their files in their file drawer, and then you'd have to share pieces of paper with each other and reports with each other. Then we moved more towards shared drives, and shared drives were just places where people just dumped a lot of stuff, whatever they thought, and it was at least a single repository. Now with programs such as Microsoft Teams or SharePoint or Google Drive or Confluence or even WorkZone, which is more the latest versions, you have ways of accessing information from lots of different areas. So the first thing you'd want to do in sweating your assets is identifying what should be part of it and making sure that all of the right people have access to that information. Quite honestly, this is much more difficult than you would expect, and especially in the identifying area, because there are still some people that have paper files, and in order for it to be shared electronically, you'd have to scan those reports and put them electronically in places. But also questions as, are you just sharing reports? Are there particular articles? Are you talking about if you had a project that there was a final report written, but that there were notes involved? Do you include that? So a lot of this is identifying what it is that you think that people should have access to, and then find a way to make sure that everybody has access to it. The next element is create a one-page abstract, and this is the step that a lot of people either are reticent about or are maybe not understanding the full impact of how good this could be for people. My first job ever was in a public library. And in that library, we had the card catalog, showing my age. And the card catalog was great because you could look up something, and rather than go immediately to the book or the resource, there was this little card with a summary on it to determine whether or not it's something you'd want to look further into, but also directions as to how to find the actual source material. And what we're talking about here is creating one-page abstracts for individual projects, and it's pretty much the same idea. So on these abstracts, and you see an example here, and there's something downloadable from our website as well. These abstracts have things that are just very basic information: project name, a contact name if you have any further questions, links to the source material, keywords so it's searchable, but then within every project, the objectives, the parameters, what the findings were, what the recommendations were, and what actions were taken or next steps that were taken. These are things that should be contained in almost all the projects that you're doing anyway. So it's much more about editing and transferring it over into this consistent format. And the reason that this works so well is that consistent format, anybody can search for the abstract, take a look at it, and if they want to just lift some of the findings, copy some of the findings off of there and drop them into what they're working on, that's great. Or if they want to actually source get to the original material and look more deeply into it, they can access it directly from that abstract as well. I liken this as sort of like cleaning out the kitchen cabinets, this part of the process, because even though it's a way for you to look and see everything that you have and to be exposed to everything that you have and determine what you would want to hold on to, and maybe if there are some particular old things that you've done that you don't think are that important, that you could potentially just get rid of those as well. So here's an example of a project that we did in Canada on different kind of cheese items, and as you can imagine, these were the findings. So in this case, all that I would have to do is lift these findings directly from the presentation that was done and put it into the abstract under those findings as well. And it's much more about just the editing and then copying onto the abstract form. So it's not nearly as daunting of a task as it may seem. Typically, when I've done this myself, you can do an abstract in a good 10-15 minutes per project that you're taking a look at. So once you've identified everything that you want to put into your to give access for everybody and you've created the consistently formatted sort of like library of a library that people can then peruse and then move forward. Now comes the time that we can summarize. And this is what's going to get us to even more actionable. So taking all of those projects that we've done and summarizing what we know is extremely important, as you can imagine. So in this case, if you take those findings and you kind of lay all of them out, let's say on pieces of paper or in some cases in a workshop format, then you can think to yourself, okay, what do I actually know about all the projects that we've done? The best way that I've seen to do this is to group things in terms of themes. So instead of looking at products or looking necessarily at geographies, what are the themes that we've learned from all the different things that we've done? So here are a couple of examples that I've seen in the US and Canada over the years. So the first theme is fresher. I was able to lift from a couple of projects, not only that our customers are buying fresh produce, but whenever we've done attitudinal studies in terms of affordability, value, and all of that, produce and freshness of produce is always the thing that pops up in terms of the cues of affordability and value in a retailer. Or something that's easier. So what makes my life as a customer easier? Click and collect. It could be something that's been reworked in a section of the store to make it easier to shop. Or for the third theme is connected. So as you go through, and as I mentioned before, this is a great time if you're the one who is doing this process and you want to get other people involved, give them skin in the game, make sure that everybody is singing off the same sheet, let's say. This is a great time to workshop this and get it together and come up with these themes and then put it together in a presentation that you can then share and communicate and activate with the rest of the organization. So once you determine what we know, then the flip side of that is identifying what we don't know. Now, what we know is much easier because it already exists. and it's for a much broader audience. Identifying what you don't know is a little bit more difficult because what you're doing is you're reaching further. You're trying to identify gaps in your knowledge. And I can promise you, as you go through, from at least from a retailer perspective and from packaged goods perspective, a lot of things that you don't know have to do with particular segments of customers that you may be missing. There are particular ways of looking at products via attributes that you could be missing, but then also the idea of testing and learning. So again, this is much more about a smaller group of people, usually management, that you can go to and say, okay, as I set my analytic plan for next year, these are the things that we want to take a look at and prioritize. So now comes the big thing. We've set up the ability for people to access things themselves. We've created abstracts in a library of libraries that people can then peruse and work on their own. We've come up with what we know, some great ideas that we can share with people to create that baseline knowledge and get everybody singing off of the same song sheet, and identified areas that priority areas that we want to discover in the near and longer term future. So how do we activate that knowledge? And it's all through communication. We've done it in several different ways. You have to become an advocate for the customer and to express yourself in as many ways as possible. We'll put it that way. So it could be newsletters. It could be weekly email updates. It could be creating videos. It could be creating personas, webinars, lunch and learns. In this COVID time, it's even more important because you don't have that sort of just general energy and interaction of working with people. So looking at as many different media, as many different formats, and as many different creative ways of getting those messages out in front of the rest of the organization. Once you can do that, the activation then becomes a little bit easier. When people ask me, how do you know that if you've been successful as an insight professional, one of my favorite responses is, if somebody comes to me 3 years later and quotes me back to myself and saying, well, we've already known this, and my thinking is, well, actually, you didn't already know this. This is something that we've done and has become just part of the everyday thinking and baseline knowledge. That's when you know that you've succeeded. So the communication and the activation is so important, regardless of which steps or which elements that you've used up to for that. Now, the big question that I always get was, who actually does this work? How am I going to pay for it? Who does the work? Now, as I mentioned before, there are 5 elements. They can be done by different people. They can be done by the same person. So this is a good time to think about, are there people who are looking for something new to do, who want to be upskilled? Is somebody just coming on board? This is a great way of onboarding and bringing somebody up to speed in the group. Identify and access. That person doesn't necessarily even need to know what everything means, as long as they have some of the technical skills to be able to put things together and make sure that everybody can serve themselves and access the information themselves. Creating the one-page abstract. Again, it can be somebody with fairly minimal knowledge, but who wants to have more exposure and get a better sense of what's been going on with the different projects. In terms of the summarizing what we know, it could be one particular person, or as I mentioned before, this is a great workshop, and I'll say it again, it is a terrific workshop. I've done it multiple times. It really brings people together. Now everybody has skin in the game, and they can move forward and evangelize what they know. Identifying what we don't know really should be a more senior person, somebody who has an eye on the future, who wants to say, okay, these are the priorities moving forward that we want to know this, this, and this. And communicate and activate is something that everybody in the group and everybody within the organization should take part in. And there are lots of creative ways to do it. I've done some internal marketing with one of our retail clients in the US where they even had contests and prizes and things like that regarding the personas and what to expect from them. So again, you can either do this yourself, you can have different people in your group do it as well, or you can hire somebody to come in as a consultant. When I've done it, working with people, what I've found is even something as simple as like a 2 to 3 week engagement of going in, setting stuff up, maybe not doing everything completely from soup to nuts, but giving people a chance to get them off and running, and then they can go back and do it themselves and then move forward. So as I mentioned before, sweating your assets is a way, with the exception of bringing in potentially a consultant like that, like me. This is something you already have all of the materials, so it's a question of time and resource as opposed to going out and spending additional money. So with that, I'd like to ask, are there any questions?
Thank you very much, Curtis. That was really interesting. You gave us some very practical advice, particularly for client organisations who are commissioning research. Certainly, I think when I look back over my career and I spent some time looking after market research for Eurotunnel, I think some of these tips would have been very useful at the time. So, no questions have come through just yet. I'm keeping an eye on that, but I have a question for you. I don't know whether you can tell us anything more about the pros and cons of the different software or platforms for sharing market research, or even if you've got any knowledge of some of the bespoke systems that are out there, because I think again, working with various companies, I know that some people do actually design their own sharing platforms for this sort of thing. What's your experience with the technology to facilitate sharing information?
My experience with technology, the Microsoft Teams I found works well as long as you've set up the teams correctly. So you can have teams within teams and sub-teams. So unless you set something up that literally crosses the entire part of the organization that you want to give access to, it's much more difficult. But once you get it set up like that, it's very easy to use. I found I'm not the most technical guy in the world, but I do find that Google Drive, once you get into it, once I got past the first 15 minutes of tearing my hair out and having to Google using Google Drive, that also was pretty easy. Confluence had some good upsides. I really am not as good with WorkZone. So WorkZone to me is not as intuitive as the others. But again, if you're within your own organization, what I found is, this is going to sound terrible, what I found is if you go to one of the youngest people on the team and you ask them what all the kids are using these days, like the WorkZone or Drop-In or whatever they're using, once you can get that own tutorial for yourself, then they work pretty similarly from that perspective. I've not used a bespoke. But then again, that is something that if I were working with a client that had a bespoke system, I would almost schedule an hour just for me to better understand how to do it.
Okay, that's great, very useful, and a few different things to look at. I've got a couple of questions now that I can read out for you. So do you find senior stakeholders are asking for this sort of summary, or is it something the Insight team might do proactively?
This is definitely something that the Insight team might do proactively. As I mentioned before, a lot of the Insight teams that I've worked with and that I've been on myself are usually seen as thought leaders and very good resources, but then after time may just sort of become part of the furniture. So this is a way to sort of re-energize that and get people back into that thought leadership position. What I mentioned before was once you do something like this and you're communicating and you're activating it, what I found to be much better is instead of having like huge presentations that you would then give if people would attend or not attend and then just kind of forget about, is find ways that you can give snippets. You know, the frequency is much more important than the depth. So what I found in a couple of organizations is once people realize that you have a consistent cycle of sort of reminding people about their customers and the things that you learned and what you know, is that then the senior stakeholders will be used to hearing from you and are more likely to become more involved with that, as opposed to just, here's my annual response to everything that's been going on, and then I'm going to go away for the rest of the year.
Okay, I think there's some good ideas there. Okay, as a one-off exercise, it sounds excellent and clear. Have you adapted this approach to ask agency partners when new research is commissioned to summarize their outputs in an abstract one-pager so it's easy to maintain?
I have not, but that is a great idea. What I found, especially with that abstract, is as long as there's a consistent kind of format that you can work with, then yes, that is something that I think would be very good for especially new people.
Okay. Right. So thank you for an inspiring presentation. This gives me the idea of proposing this approach to a client of mine of 15 years, which has gone cold due to the arrival of a new CEO and COVID. I'm looking for ways of connecting with a new CEO, showing him all that was done in market research over the last 15 years. Would this work, do you think? Would I have to invest in the work, or could I potentially sell it to the company?
That is a great question. And earlier you asked if this was a one-off. I've always used this as a one-off. But as far as selling it back to the company, I absolutely would do something like that. And it is something that I worked with a dairy marketing organization in the US, and it was my full-time job for 3 months. And so, I mean, I know that's very expensive. I don't necessarily think that you would want to, charge them for that whole thing. But even for something as simple as I mentioned before, even 2 weeks worth of time, you can get a really good sense of what you have and go through a lot of the steps of this process.
Okay, how do you keep this going, updating regularly? Is it better for organizations to reach out to external consultants to do it periodically?
Yes, that's my personal experience, is that this is something that it's not necessarily ongoing. Once you get it set up and you create the abstracts and all of that, that part can be ongoing. What I found is, again, it kind of comes in fits and starts. So, maintaining that energy for something like this is a little bit harder because, we all have very busy day jobs, and but it's not a bad idea to maybe go back every 3 months or 6 months and pick either the most junior person on the team or somebody that wants to be upskilled or somebody that's new to the team and have them update it that way.
Okay. Now, I know you mentioned that you had some frameworks and templates on your website, but here's one question referring to that sort of thing. Do you have a framework for helping to identify knowledge gaps, for example, a checklist?
I don't, but on the right now on your screen is my contact information, and I have that called special offer. I'm a very friendly guy. If somebody wants to contact me and just talk and potentially talk this through, this is not something that I wouldn't really. It's not something I would charge for. But if somebody had some ideas and suggestions, I can help them work through it and get them started.
Okay, well, that's a very kind offer. Thank you, Curtis. Okay, I think that's all of the questions that we have, unless anybody's got any last minute things to send through. Yeah, just one. Thank you very much, Curtis. So I think I would join with that person and say thank you very much for taking this time, particularly getting up so early in the morning to come and talk to us. That's going above and beyond. So very much appreciated. I think No more questions, just lots of thank yous coming through. So yeah, thanks very much indeed. And thank you to everyone for watching today. We hope you found it useful and interesting. And make sure you check out our future webinars because there's some very interesting ones coming up. Right, I think that's it. Thanks again, Curtis, and bye everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you for having me.